everybody, I'm Chris Yaw. Welcome to ChurchNext. It's a place where energetic Christians come to hear from experienced mentors. And today we're joined by a man who's doing some pretty cool stuff to reinvigorate the church. His name's Tim Soerens, and he's a social entrepreneur, a Christian minister who believes that being rooted and active in the local community, local parish community, is central to the call of God on our lives individually and as faith communities. He's the co-founder of an initiative. It's called the Parish Collective, which is dedicated to renewing congregations and neighborhoods. And Tim, let's start right there. Welcome to ChurchNext. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Parish Collective is?
Sure, Chris. Well, thanks for having me. It's a gift to be here. The Parish Collective was birthed out of a handful of relationships that all were seeking to figure out, how do we be faithfully present to a particularly defined area? There was just a handful of us at the beginning. And myself, who's in downtown Seattle, another friend in Seattle, and then a dear friend and colleague, Paul Sparks, who was in downtown Tacoma, which is about 40 minutes from Seattle. And we were all at different places. Some of us plant churches, some of us seeking to renew and revitalize churches, but we were experimenting around with this idea of how do we literally take a kind of a marker to a map in a dotted line, not a hard line, but say, we want to be holistically responsible for what God is up to here and join in God's renewal efforts here. Kind of the old idea of parish. And as we looked around, we felt like there weren't a lot of colleagues of support. We didn't feel like we knew what we were doing, certainly. And so the Parish Collective really birthed out of the experimentation of trying to care holistically for particular places, and that required then collaboration within and across the parishes.
And of course, parish is a word that Lutherans use, that Episcopalians use, that Catholics use to, as you've put it, to demarcate an area in which geographically those who live are responsible. And it was one thing when you were in ancient Rome or in medieval England where it was the only church there. You didn't have, but you come to America and your parish will include about 20 other churches. How does that fit in?
Well, that was a big part of the vision for the Parish Collective, and that is, on the one hand, you could say that there very much are, say, in one neighborhood, 20 different churches, 20 different church buildings with their systems and their histories, their theologies and trajectories. But I think that if you see it from how I imagine God might see the church, there actually is one church there. But the reality is they're not connected. If we are to be the family of God, it's kind of like we're not a very good family. We don't even know each other. And so a big part of the reason for the Parish Collective is we actually think, no, if you could put a big pause button on time and space within a parish, the people who are active there, they live, work, play there, if they're people of faith, they're the church. And largely they're who their colleagues and their friends and their neighbors and their everyone else, that's who they're witnessing as the church. But you can imagine how if that is totally fragmented or there's no imagination there, then a lot of folks who aren't maybe yet of faith would just think, well, yeah, church is solely an institution. It's solely a building. It's, those kinds of things.
Right. And so does interfaith or ecumenical work play a very important part in your scheme here?
Yeah, ecumenical especially, and then interfaith does, and I'll explain how in a second. Ecumenically, it does profoundly, because we feel like there are, let's just say, like in the neighborhood that I'm in right now, I'm calling you from a downtown neighborhood in Seattle where the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology is. I'm spending some time here today. The neighborhood is Belltown. This is not my neighborhood, but there's probably 30,000 people who live in Belltown. And there's probably 4 or 5 churches. But let's just say of the 20,000 people that are here, there are 1,000 people of Christian faith. How in the world would they come to know each other? How would they imagine a way of life where they're seeking God's renewal project? Well, there's very little platform for that. So we feel like once you lay the groundwork, literally, for how do we join in God's renewal project for a particular place, then there's all kinds of opportunity for collaboration. And of course that happens within and between church establishments. And then, of course, as it relates to interfaith, it's profoundly important as well, because you've got all kinds of multiple faiths who are interested in the community development, economic development, environmental care, and so on of that place. And of course, we would want to partner in the work that they're doing there.
Right. So then, now the Parish Collective then is this collection of what's three, I think you named, churches that, and so then are you in charge of kind of this collective, or in charge of a church yourself, or how does your job description work?
Right now, my full-time work is with the Parish Collective. I've stepped out of day-to-day leadership of the church, and I'm partnering with a part of a great church in my neighborhood, and I'm helping to lead there. But myself and Paul Sparks, the other co-founding director, we are giving it a go, as it were, to try and build and leverage this platform and kind of function as community organizers within the church. Especially around North America, but we're beginning to have some fun conversations in the UK as well.
Right. Now, so it sounds like, though, as you've mentioned, I mean, parish is an old word. It goes back to the way churches have in years past organized themselves. Are you starting another denomination then, or how do you look at that?
No, we don't think of it as a denomination at all. We think of it as a collegial network, and we think of it as, the word platform, I think, is the best word for it. Platform in the sense of, you know how like Facebook is a platform, Skype in some ways is a platform, what we're using right now. Ideally, what we want to do is create the minimum requirements for introducing people and giving them enough vision to be collaborating together in God's renewal project, whatever that is. And then we kind of get out of the way. So we don't have strong oversight over what people do or even how they meet, but we see our grand task as identifying as many people as of faith within neighborhoods that raise their hand and say, I am of faith and I care about my neighborhood. And then we're trying to bring them together to imagine what the Spirit might be up to there.
And these people may or may not be members of local congregations there.
That's true. A lot of times they are, but they might not be. Sometimes, as you know, because of the advent of the automobile and a lot of other things, people may worship in one neighborhood and live and work in others. So what we do encourage, though, is the people that are most excited about these renewal efforts to have a sense of responsibility to one neighborhood, whether they live or work there, or potentially even worship there. To focus in on that and to, in a sense, pivot with other parts there.
Okay. Well, I'm a local pastor. How would you want to interest me in what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would say, first, within your personal practice, I would say, tell me about your neighborhood and what is going on there, what you feel like God is doing, what are the assets there? What are the gifts there that could be leveraged? What are the crises? What are the problems? What are the needs? And how are you working with other Christians in your neighborhood to get after that? That's personal, just as a follower of Jesus. But as a pastor, Chris, I would say you might have people all over the place who are worshiping with you on Sundays or Wednesday nights or whenever. But what the rest of their week, how are they collaborating with other Christians in everyday ways with a kingdom imagination, with a sacred imagination? And what I would want to do with you is to say, how many people, a part of your congregation, have that desire? And then how can I help connect them to other people in your neighborhood and city and region?
Well, you probably run into, I mean, certainly you're, as long as churches have been in neighborhoods, they've known of each other. They've had members who are neighbors and that kind of thing. And these things build up where over time, some people in some churches don't talk to some people in other churches, or there are theological differences or long-standing personality differences, so that, you know, in many ways, the ecumenical and interfaith work, which you know, you and I desire, is really inhibited by long-standing, before we even got close to being on the scene, things that have happened, and I suppose you run into that.
Oh, all the time. And one idea around that is an interesting conversation. If you are, say, a pastor who believes that God's dream for creation is reconciliation between ourselves and God, with one another,
Yeah.
with the built environment, creation. If you would think of reconciliation as a metaphor or a synonym of God's mission in the world, then I think it's fair to say that if individual Christians and churches are not reconciled with one another, then mission is reconciliation, and we have a lot of work of reconciliation to do with one another. So most churches care about their neighborhoods or others, but they may not have the same kind of care to be in growing, reconciling relationships with other Christians. And I would say that is a part of God's mission, a big part of it. And until we're seen as a reconciling on a relational, everyday way, I think that a lot of people who are not of faith or even are part of different faith traditions kind of say, I'm not sure that I'm going to smoke what you're selling because you're not doing it yourself.
Oh, no, there's a great amount of truth to that. And so very often, if it's reconciliation that we're not interested in, we then put all of our efforts into feeding the hungry, or into some other kind of service that we're able to say, well, we can't make, we have gotten involved with local congregations in our place. And, out of, I think, 60 congregations, maybe 8 or 10 of us are together. And there are certainly the challenges of sizes. Many of these pastors and clergy and leaders work full-time, and they can only make an evening or a Saturday, which makes it harder for others. And I mean, you get into all kinds of logistical and not to mention theological. And then what you were alluding to, which is that how do you make that a priority, reconciliation? Do you find that a tough sell?
Yes and no. I mean, I feel like, first of all, I feel like a lot of my friends who are Christians, whether they're in kind of vocational ministry or not, have a greater sense of wanting to be about what God is up to in the world as a major theme, and a minor theme, the faith tradition that they come from. It's not that it's not important to them, but kind of waving the denominational flag, I think, is maybe a little less important to this generation than it was certainly 20 or 30 years ago.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, all kinds of statistics would back that up. But it's still those flag wavers are still in the pews.
They are definitely in the pews. And to be honest, with those folks, on one level, you can only work with desire. So if the desire is not to work together and be collaborative, it's not worth my time or other people's time, spending all of my time trying to convince. Yeah. But I would want to be I would want to be in relationship with those folks and keep learning from them, and hopefully them learning from me of, well, what is the root source of the conflict? Why would you not want to work with another church? Or what is the fear underneath not wanting to work with this church, or maybe more importantly, this person, this neighbor of yours? Because there's a somewhere within that fear is a defining narrative, and I'd want to figure out what is that narrative and explore it together, because it might be really causing them harm.
So I mean, I love your optimism, Tim. So you're working in Seattle and in Tacoma, and you are looking to bring congregations together. But I think more importantly, because you don't really use that language, you want to bring believers together within a certain area to take a look at. So in many ways, you're kind of mimicking, hopefully, what their pastors are telling them too, huh?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, Chris, it's been fun as we've opened stuff up online. There's people in San Diego, in Edmonton, Canada. There's groups that are growing really all over the place. And yeah, I mean, I would say that it's pretty exciting what's going on. What we're always trying to figure out is how do we cultivate healthy partnerships, and that requires perhaps a new imagination.
Go into that a bit. How do we cultivate healthy partnerships, and the role of imagination there?
Well, there's a book that I would tell folks is just really fantastic. It's a business book. It's called The Responsibility Virus. Maybe not the most. It's got kind of a funny title, but it's written by a Harvard professor, and the book is all about that oftentimes, this happens, of course, in just about every relationship, that usually one of us takes a little bit more responsibility, and that cues one of us to take a little bit less responsibility. I think healthy partnerships are always talking about that. There's also power dynamics and things like that, but one of the beautiful things about trying to build healthy partnerships is, of course, you have a hope, a goal. It might be a specific project, it might be a long-term initiative, but the closer we get to, here's what I'm seeking to do, and here's what you're seeking to do, and here's why, then we get to keep iterating via our relationship until the project is over or the initiative is over. And I think that defining our roles, of course, this is nothing new, this is not a huge idea, but can easily be forgotten in either the excitement of doing something new or the what could feel like the monotony of everyday faithful presence.
Yeah. So the responsibility virus has to do with the ways that there's a certain amount of when we take responsibility for our community, there's a certain amount of contagion involved there.
I think so. I mean, if you just imagine, if you took a marker to a map and thought about within the church and certainly well beyond it, God is at work well beyond just the church. If you just began to literally, like a fire, put all the wonderful things, the great nonprofits, what the public sector is doing, what healthy small businesses are doing, it can be phenomenal. There's a wonderful movement that's been going on for decades now called asset-based community development, which is looking, how do we connect the assets of a place versus just the needs? And that often creates really healthy and robust citizens who want to keep building a healthy and resilient and sustainable place. And so I think by looking at the assets, that can help stimulate the imagination.
To kind of mimic what you're saying, the idea then is to, and churches do often get in this, don't they, that we're here to minister to you, and we have the great font of all wisdom and all goodness, and we are going to seek to bless. When I think where you're calling us to is say, whoa, God was active way before you, and God is active in ways that you'll never know about. Try to pay attention to that. Yeah,
I actually think that's pretty much the first step for ministry. As individuals, in partnerships, and even as institutions, I feel like listening to what the Spirit to is step one. And that is not necessarily common. But I think it's becoming more and more common. I feel like if some of the listeners have been tracking the missional church conversation, in my opinion, the best practitioners and theorists almost always begin with listening. You're seeing that happening in different, all kinds of different entrepreneurial ministry settings, both mainline and evangelical. Listening is not a super sexy campaign, but if you begin there, I think it prescribes this certain kind of humility and courage and wisdom that often I think the Spirit is calling us to.
Yeah, and I do interview a number of church planners here, Tim, and very often when I ask them what they would do differently, they will say, we need to listen longer, because it's such an important role, because the Spirit is up to all kinds of things around us.
Right, absolutely. And I feel like the Spirit is breaking boundaries for us within the church. I mean, as you well know, there's plenty of statistics to say we're not doing that well as a big church, which means that it doesn't mean that God's not at work. It means that we might need to stop and repent and reimagine a lot of times. And when you think about it, even on an individual level, if we repent, if we turn 180 in our thinking, as Scripture tells us to do, well, then what's the thing that happens right after that? Well, you're typically quite open to God's leading, and that's a practice that we have to keep nurturing, not just as we begin initiatives, but it has to be an ongoing cycle.
Mm-hmm. Now, as a pastor, one-time pastor who's now working full-time for this Parish Collective, and working for the Collective, you touch base, I'm guessing, with a number of different faith communities. And as you know, 80% of America's faith communities are not growing. They are shrinking or at best plateaued. What are
Yes.
some of the things that are inspiring you about what you're seeing in the more vibrant congregations that you come in contact with?
You know, what's most inspiring to me right now with some of the more vibrant congregations is how, and this is one of the great gifts of getting to work with the Parish Collective, is getting to work with a lot of often newer, younger, vibrant congregations, many of whom the idea of faithful presence in a particular place is central. Is seeing how, say there's 12, 15, 25 folks who are in a neighborhood and they're living their lives together. Sunday, the gathering is very important and liturgy is important to them and it is to me. But they become known as this kind of tribe within the neighborhood. For better or worse, they are kind of those Christians or that church or those people. And I feel like there are more and more folks who have never been a part of the Christian faith tradition who are rubbing up against this tribe of people in neighborhood meetings, in coffee shops, in raising kids together and seeing each other in the park. I mean, these are very normal ways, but they're actually getting to see what I believe is the very best apologetic for the Christian faith, which is a community of people seeking to live out the good news of Jesus Christ, and failing sometimes. But it's not just a singular event. It's this ongoing reality. I'm seeing that across the board, whether it's in urban neighborhoods, small towns, suburbs, which is maybe the toughest place. I think that's the new mission frontier, is suburbs. That is terribly inspiring to me. I would say this too, that a lot of these groups then are finding a lot of resonance with one another. They're having the same, whether they're in a downtown neighborhood or a rural area or suburb, there's common highlights and trials when you try and care for a particular place and you're trying to live out your life together. I mean, anyone who's tried to be in any kind of intentional community knows how difficult it is, how much forgiveness is required. And I feel like that's really inspiring as well, and how we actually need each other in and across neighborhoods to be supporting one another. I think that there's been a move. I've been seeing some of them use the language of parish, some of them not, but there are all kinds of churches, I feel like, who are networking together, usually around seeking to be a part of God's mission in a particular place, and then realizing, we don't have to be about the whole city. We can be about this neighborhood and network with other churches, and together we can build this really robust relational fabric of care that could be far more powerful than just a large institution with programs and big budgets and big institutions.
No, I mean, you strike upon something I think is really important. We often think evangelism, you've got bus signs and you've got skywriting or you've got whatever, but the original evangelism, and the most effective, isn't it, is the kind where one really truly gives of one to another.
I think so.
And that happens most profoundly in these one-on-one relationships. And so the idea is that, and you've talked about 3 congregations who are part of kind of this parish collective. Are there more? Did I mishear you? Or is your job to kind of preach the word to more congregations to come on board?
Yeah, I mean, I would see myself as along with my colleague Paul, chief organizer and storyteller, and of course, in helping to run an organization, there's things that have to be done as well. But yeah, there's about 450 churches now who are part of the online platform, and we're always trying to figure out how do we've done I think a pretty good job of helping to get individuals and leaders raise their hands and saying, you know what, these things matter to me. Joining God's mission in a particular place, this matters to me, and I want to be in collaboration with others. Where we need to grow, I think, and what is the next iteration for us is what is the best way, both in person and using internet technology, how do we really stimulate collaboration in ways that don't just require us?
Yeah, and I'm playing the Satan here because I want to. It sounds like what you're doing is fascinating, and I want to kind of answer the questions, be the surrogate for people who are listening. So I'm behind everything that you're saying. What do I do from here, and what's in it for me?
Right. Well, I appreciate the question. I mean, the first thing that would be easiest to do is to you can sign up on, if you go to the website parishcollective.org, there's a way that you can map yourself using Google Maps. And you don't have to put your home address. You can put an intersection near your home, or you could put an intersection where you feel like the town center is or the neighborhood center. And what that does is just is waving the flag and saying, I'm here. Okay. When you do that, then of course you'll be able to see, are there others who are there who I can collaborate with? And if you look at the national map, it looks like there's a lot going on, but I mean, it's been a drop in the bucket as to what could actually happen.
Yeah, we're a big country.
We're a very big country,
and so, you have 450 churches, and there are 350,000 churches in the U.S. alone.
Totally.
But so one signs up on the parishcollective.org. One then puts a little pin into where their congregation is. And if they're the only one in that area, well, maybe they hang around, and after a few more years of your work, you've got other people who then all of a sudden contact you and talk a little bit about it. But there also may be existing, ecumenical groups or yes. Whatever. What would you do for a group like that?
Well, if there's existing ecumenical groups, I would love, first of all, if there's any of them listening, I'd love to just talk to them personally. They can email me at tim@parishcollective.org, because or pastors as well, or community development leaders, because with folks that are leading organizations and networks and congregations, how I'd want to work with them is think, first of all, if you feel like this is something that God is moving within your organization or congregation, let's get a pilot group going, not a parish collective pilot group. Let's get a group of St. Andrews who's trying to care particularly for this particular neighborhood, and let's imagine ways that they can start working together in everyday ways. And we would love to help with that. I mean, we've got all kinds of training and articles, and we have a certificate program through the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. There's Paul and I would be excited to come out and help train and network and walk neighborhoods. The thing about signing up on the network is you realize, of course, I'm not the only one who cares about this. I mean, that's what potentially could be kind of the viral tipping of the scale on this. Is it's a pretty simple idea. Joining in God's renewal in particular places. A lot of people want to be about that. And I would say, as a word of caution, I wouldn't want anyone to try and do it alone. I don't feel like it can't be alone. And so if there are networks, I'd say, how do we be a part? How can we be a resource to you so that you can help pivot from the existing network you have to maybe connect with even more people?
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. So one of the things you brought up and you've kind of hinted at, Tim, is this idea of community organizing. And many times communities organize, and that phrase is used, with a political purpose, and political in the pure sense that there is an injustice that we want to rally around. We want to get the street lights fixed, or we want to get the poor helped and that kind of thing. Can you explain to me the role of community organizing and what you do?
Absolutely. I think it's central. And if you think about the word political not in partnership, but in being public and caring about the public, I feel like that is our call as all of us. It's not just my call. I might have a gifting for it and a passion for it, but I think that's our task. And so,
and it's not just a Christian call either, is it?
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a citizenship call. Yeah. There's an author and pastor who's become a friend that you'd probably have a good time interviewing. His name is David Fitch. He's in Chicago. He has said that he feels like the pastoral call, increasingly, is not to so much receive people who may or may not come to our worship gatherings, but we are truly to be community organizers for the kingdom of God. And of course, political, he's not talking about partisanship. That's the task. And so I feel like that is absolutely not just the task of the Parish Collective. I truly believe that's a big part of the task for the church, particularly when there are already, there's 40,000 denominations. So, that's a problem. We got to figure out how we're going to organize. How do we be a public witness? Yeah. And not just in rallying around issues, as important as those are. I feel like a lot of us are getting issue fatigue. There's really important causes, whether that be environmental care, human trafficking, homelessness, you name it. These require expertise and best practice. But I feel like the call to join in the mission of God requires the renewal and reconciliation of everything, and that means we got to figure out how to work together.
Right. And so, when you talk about kind of tools you have at your disposal, are they having to do with kind of discernment of what community organizing might be around? Are they about ways, processes of reconciliation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are imagining, a lot of our tools are, if you can get a small group of people to say together, you know what, we're in this neighborhood and we want to be about God's renewal effort here, then we have practices and postures and practices that can help get you going and give you some of the best practice of how we've seen this work well. Of course, it's going to be contextual. Of course, literally every neighborhood is different. But there are different postures and practices, I think, that are really crucial, of which we've already talked about, like listening.
Right.
And there's all kinds of resources and friends who've written all kinds of books. I mean, and host conferences and stuff like that we'd love to tell people about.
Right. And so I asked you a question about where you're finding the energy and what's enthusiastic, but I'm sure that as you call on different congregations and that kind of thing, if that's the appropriate word, you also are observing some probably significant challenges. What are some of the big challenges that you see us facing as a North American church these days?
Well, there's three things that I think are the greatest challenge to the North American church. The first is consumerism, and I just feel like a lot of wiser people than me are thinking of consumerism almost like a religion. It has it inspires desire, and it easily becomes an idol. And I feel like that has crept into profoundly the church in North America and perhaps all over the world. But I feel like the idea of church shopping and the idea of what's in it for me is so normal that we need a prophetic movement that I think is beginning that challenges consumerism within the broader church. Yeah. Now, a lot of the folks who are doing that are big on the missional church idea of joining in God's renewal effort. Now, I'd say number two, my second fear is that we can get ourselves in trouble in being kind of a colonial power if we don't feel the effects of our actions. So oftentimes it's with the best of intentions, but if we're trying to join in what God is up to, but we're not actually a part of the story, we're not around long enough to see what actually happens to our efforts, real damage can be done with the best of intentions. So I would say colonialism is the second big problem.
And explain that a different way.
Sure. I would say that colonialism happens when we feel like we have an answer and we can insert it anywhere. And so, but again, it's with the best of intentions. Or, there's folks who are saying, you know what, on a global level, look at the example of aid, right? There's a wonderful book called Dead Aid by a woman named Debisa Moyo who says the aid that's been coming from the West potentially is doing more harm than good. It's creating dependencies. It's propping up corrupt dictatorships. Well, on a much smaller level, our efforts of renewal, when not rooted in everyday relationship, can end up doing real harm. There's a wonderful book called When Helping Hurts that's addressed this really well.
Yeah, Robert Fulton.
Great book.
Yeah.
So that's an example of well-intentioned colonialism. And then there's colonialism that's been, I think, happens through, this might be a bit more, I might be picking on folks more, but I feel like the more we have sermons and church leadership that is broad, regional, and national, that's coming in via satellite, of course, the less contextual it has to be. I mean, if you lead a church that has campuses in multiple states, for example, you can't even make a joke about the weather. Right. I mean, so I feel like while there's deep biblical truths that obviously can be communicated via those kinds of mediums, living them out takes a certain skill. Yeah. And you need to be, I think, in in dialogue, not with the people that you're living life with, but what the Spirit is up to there. And so colonialism can creep in.
Yeah. Okay, I'm getting that. And then the third challenge that you've kind of identified?
It's a little bit, maybe not one word, but I would say it's just we keep thinking that formation, our spiritual formation, is going to happen through the mind, through intellect, through information, and I feel like that's setting us up for failure. And I think that it actually helps. That's in some ways that's kind of the gasoline which keeps the engine going for consumerism and colonialism. I know you've met my friend Mark Scandrette, who talks a lot about practice. I think what he's talking about is dead on, and a lot of other folks who are saying we actually need to practice our way into a new way of thinking instead of just thinking our way into a new way of practicing. I think that that's absolutely right. And so I love ideas. I read a lot. I think stuff like this is fantastic. But we all know that until we figure out how to practice this stuff and practice it together, the true formative work that God wants to do in us is likely not going to happen.
Well, you don't really own your identity until you practice. I mean, you can read all you want, but you've got to actually kind of try the shoe on, don't you? And
I think
practice it in order for you to really form an identity around it, is my guess.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. So consumerism, colonialism, and this idea of formation via information, I feel like they're all dangers for the church.
Right. And so you're talking with a number of people who are interested in church leadership in this interview, and I'm wondering what some of the important habits and virtues and practices to cultivate might be for those who are listening.
Well, this will be no surprise, but I would begin with listening, and I think that listening requires a kind of true humility of realizing that at best we get to be a part of God's big dream for this world, but and we have a significant part to play, but we're just one small part, and it really is through collaborations that we get to be, I think, a bigger part. So listening is crucial. I would say too, this is somewhat general, but I would say that the courage to experiment, to try new things, start small, fail fast, those kinds of ideas. I feel like that's absolutely crucial. I mean, if someone is listening to this and they're like, yes, this parish idea, I am all in. I wouldn't prescribe that you next Sunday preach kind of a sermon that says this is exactly the direction we're going, and if you're not in, then you're out. I think it's very wise to be bold and courageous with experiments, but to find, of our congregation, who are the 4, 5, 6 people who are really stoked about this? How do we create kind of an innovative sandbox of experimentation within our congregation, and then keep teasing that out? Yeah. So I think just courage to experiment is crucial, and then I think the ongoing openness to be surprised by what God is doing around us. And that's obviously these partnerships. I feel like to be open to partnerships, I think that's a significant way that the Spirit works. And I think sometimes in surprising ways.
Now, how long ago did you go from working as a parish pastor, if you will, for a full-time job to this job in the Parish Collective?
Oh, I've been doing this full time for about 6 months, so not that long.
6 months. So, because one of the things, certainly, that's benefit of being a pastor is that you got to preach every week, and you've got a certain amount of spiritual discipline that just is almost a byproduct of what you do, even if you don't feel like reading the Bible, you have to, because you've got to kind of quote unquote do your job. And so I'm wondering what are spiritually, personally for you, what have been some of the adaptations you've had to make, and what are some of the practices or habits that you've adopted to help you make it through this transition?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Well, I've had to live into both within my own neighborhood and in this work. It's been a risk. It's an entrepreneurial risk. One thing that's true of all entrepreneur endeavors, whether they're faith-based or business or public sector is there's extreme risk. You don't know what's going to happen. So I have had to over and over and over again really believe that this is not just an idea, just a good idea, not just a good theological, it's not just a strategy. I need to continue to come back again and say, God, is this what you want me to be doing? Is this your call on my life? And so far, I certainly feel that way. I also need the supportive relationship both within the organization. You know, we're building a board, we're building the kind of support structures that I need, that my colleague Paul needs, and that is also totally important. I mean, just now, we're beginning to say more and more to the people we've been working with, look, we're going to need your help. We need some help financially. We need some help with structure, and that's beginning to come beautifully. That's not fun. It's not fun asking for help, but I think asking for help in some ways is precisely what we're trying to get folks to be about. We're saying we can't do this all on our own. So that's been an issue for me. And finally, I guess I'd say there's I need to keep risking. There's an iterating with these ideas. There's kind of the core ideas, but there is the ongoing, well, what if this works? What if this, maybe we should try this, or maybe we should try this. That's a part of any entrepreneurial endeavor too. So that kind of begins the seesaw effect of, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And this didn't work, and this did, and so that goes on and on.
Yeah, no, and I think that because you've identified as certainly the entrepreneurial slant in terms of developing habits for existing congregations, but it's got to be tough. To think that, okay, I'm going to leave that quote unquote secure position with these people in this community that I love and that love me and have supported me for this part of the journey, and I'm going to try something that's very unproven. And I would imagine that how does one go through that, understanding that if it doesn't work out according to your plans, that God is still in there, and not getting mad at God for it.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And I feel like that's where the kind of humility of realizing that, well, I do feel like God is about this. I feel like there's an underground movement afoot that I want to help just cultivate and seed out. I feel like this is already happening. It just needs to be connected and pointed out. If I can agent, obviously I want it to be, but at the end of the day, it may sound a bit cliched, but I really feel like God is doing something, and whether or not I'm a part of it is less important than I feel like this new movement of faithful presence in particular places, I feel is needed for the church.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't work out, I guess, as we plan. So finally, I always like to ask, Tim, if there's something that you came to the interview that you wanted to express that I haven't asked about, if there's something we started talking about that you want to elaborate on more, and then I cut you off, or what is it that the Spirit is filling you with that you might want to leave us with?
Well, I've appreciated your questions because your audience is, as I understand, is very much with pastoral leaders who are thinking about fruitfulness and faithfulness for their churches. And I guess I'm just really grateful for the questions of thinking from the perspective of a pastor or the everyday Christian. How can we get involved, and how can we partner better given our incredible budget concerns or relational stresses and stuff like that? And so I'm really grateful to reflect anew on how to be working on a better level institutionally with churches, with denominations, with even parachurch organizations. Mm-hmm. So I'm grateful for those questions. I'm also I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about this kind of stuff. You talk about doing. It's a gift to kind of tell the story, and so I'm grateful for the getting to do that with you.
Tim Soerens with the Parish Collective, parishcollective.org. Thanks for being my guest at ChurchNext.
Thanks, Chris.